Hello, and welcome to the Lore of Braunhaven. Today, we're going to touch on uh, the character and monster conversion between the two, the first edition of the Braunhaven Campaign Setting and the second edition. Of course, the first being for Old School Essentials, and the second edition being for Castles and Crusades. And so there's been a little bit of, I wouldn't necessarily say concern. There's maybe a touch of concern in people saying, "Well, why did you switch? Uh, why did you switch systems?" And I can read between the lines that concern is kind of pinned in the background of when they ask this question, because the first thing that they're thinking is, oh great, I'm going to have to convert everything over if I want the new material. So the first thing I can tell you is that and of course most people that have played an OSR system realize that there's very little conversion to be done, and that is the case here. There is very little conversion that needs to be done. For those of us that go back, and a lot of us have this, I guess, rose-tinted glasses, nostalgia remembrance of AD&D Second Edition. But the reality is that there was a quite a bit of conversion process that had to go into um, a lot of the underpinnings between first edition AD&D and second edition AD&D. And then when third edition came out from Wizards of the Coast, what, in 2000? that It was a mess. Trying to convert things over from second edition to third edition was like trying to read an arcane language that nobody knew. And they put out multiple guides on how to do it, and it never quite came out the way that we had hoped, or at least what we had remembered. And so the good news is that from Old School Essentials to Castles and Crusades, there's very little conversion that needs to be done. Like almost none. It's nearly a 1-to-1, and we'll go over that, and I'll show you how that is. If you are playing 5th edition, go ahead and check the link down below. There is, from Troll Lord, they have put up a PDF on converting your 5th edition material and characters over to Castles and Crusades. It's fairly painless. Of course, Braunhaven was never designed. Well, I can't say it was never designed. It was originally contemplated to be a 5th edition campaign setting. And I moved away from 5th edition because I kept running into situations, especially in 5th edition's Dungeon Master's Guide, that had me beating my head against the wall. There were simply certain things that were too overly complicated in 5th edition to that kind of hampered world building for me. And when I was creating Braunhaven, it really came down to either Old School Essentials or Castles and Crusades. And I went with Old School Essentials because of its absolute simplicity. Now, I will say that the original Braunhaven campaign setting was designed in mind for Old School Essentials advanced fantasy. That doesn't mean that you couldn't play it with the basic edition, but and I've noted this several times in the books. It is geared towards playing advanced fantasy. So the first thing that I will tell you is that in your whatever conversion you're going to do, the first thing that you really should be doing is go into Old School Essentials Advanced Fantasy and convert everything over to Ascending AC. I know there are a bunch of you guys that absolutely love Thaco, and that's fine, but the reality is Thaco wasn't that good, and we're just gonna say that right off the bat. It's a lot less mental gymnastics to do Ascending AC, and it removes the complication from things. The other thing that will come into your mind is, well, how do saving throws work? So we'll get into that. And there's really not much conversion that goes there either. So looking at the old school essentials character sheet, we can see that in this case we have Brawlin Stone Anvil. He is a dwarf fighter. When I went in and created this character, I went with the advanced uh, old school essentials creation of race and class, and that will make your life a lot easier as well. There is talk, and I've seen some of it, of race as class in the forthcoming Reforged edition of the player's backpack that will be coming soon for Castles and Crusades. But I mean, if you want to play, the most elfiest elf or the most dwarviest dwarf, that's fine. I think that it pigeonholes the characters into too simplistic of a view. Just because you're a dwarf doesn't mean that you always adhere to dwarf things. There's no reason that a dwarf couldn't be an illusionist, for example, or a dwarf could be a necromancer. There's there's no such thing as a common stereotype. And I mean, if you want to look at real world values, not that a fantasy game has anything to do with real world, but you know, what is the typical class of a human? There isn't one. Humans do all manner of things. There's no one archetypical human that does all these things most of the time. That just doesn't happen. Each person has their own career, aka a class, and that's how the world works. Works the same way here. And so there's nothing wrong with playing dwarf or playing race as class, but it will make your life a lot easier if you just bite the bullet and go over. So if you're looking at how do you convert race as class, well, if you look through the old school essentials advanced fantasy player's tome, you will note that things like a dwarf, when you get right down to it, they're a fighter. If you look at half orc, when you get right down to it, they are a thief, or AKA a rogue. And so it's fairly easy to determine which of these races as class. Elves are a little weird because you're going to end up, if you want to do a perfect one-to-one conversion, you're going to end up with a multi-class character. They're going to be a fighter wizard. But that's one of those complicated, strange scenarios that is not usually it's not that common. But so you have Brawlin, the dwarf fighter, and these are his stats. Of course I went with ascending AC to make life easier, but I did note on the character sheet the original stats too. So for instance, at level 1 as a fighter, he's going to get a +0 for his base to hit for his class. That equals THAC-O 19 if you are looking at those charts. His AC is 16. That of course is AC 4, etc., etc. I in all of my campaigns for level 1s, I always go with maximum hit points at level 1. And so with his +1 to Constitution, Brawlin ends up with 9. So how does this translate over to Castles and Crusades? Well, like I said, it's nearly 1-to-1. They are going to end up with more hit points. And you will note on this character sheet for Castles and Crusades, I did make a mistake. I said that he had 9 hit points. He wouldn't. He would have 11 at max. Because in Castles and Crusades, fighters have a D10 for their hit dice. And so at max, he would have had 10 hit points +1 for his Constitution, and that brings him up to 11. So this number is incorrect. But the rest of it all tracks out. And one of the nice things, and this is another reason for my my choice of moving to Castles and Crusades, it keeps the simplicity, but it adds just enough crunch in the background to make the games a little bit more playable, in my opinion. So in OSE, I feel like it is the old school, you know, basic and expert edition D&D where it is hack and slash, swords and sorcery. People talk about the three pillars of role playing. You've got exploration, you've got in combat, of course, and then there is role play. And OSE really leans heavy towards. I mean, that pillar for combat is massively huge. Not much smaller is exploration, and then you got this tiny little pillar for role play. And Castles and Crusades is much more evenly balanced in those three pillars. And so I find that in my campaign since converting to CNC, the players have their characters doing a lot more role play interaction. Whereas in OSE, there was a lot of moving from completing this dungeon, doing the exploration, and maybe a little bit of chatter in towns that mostly went toward. It wasn't role play; it was shopping. They wanted to buy new stuff or repair things and spend their gold and then move on. There was very little interaction, no matter how much I tried to bake into the campaign setting. And I've even seen reviews of my works where some of the reviewers who are hardcore OSR fans complain that I put too much detail into an NPC. Is there such a thing as too much detail? I mean, I didn't list out, that his favorite meal for dinner is pork chops, or that he had a love interest in his youth and she left and was killed in a campaign somewhere else, and so now he pines throughout his. I didn't write that. I developed the characters to give them a round personality. You don't generally meet people and not know at least a little bit about their background within the first 15 minutes of talking to them. You know who this person is. And if you don't, you weren't paying attention to what they said. So no, I don't believe that there was too much detail. And the reason why these guys think it's too much detail is because they want to get to the next dungeon and kill more stuff. And they look at monsters and everything that they interact with as bags of XP. And that shouldn't be how the game is played. I don't believe that that was the original intent. And yet, here we are. We've been playing it this way for quite a long time. And it continues on with the OSR to this day. Castles and Crusades kind of alleviates that, gives you more depth and more rounded abilities in order to interact with the people and the situations in your environment. So that was a big reason for switching over. So looking at these stats, so if you all of your attributes are exactly the same. The modifiers fall into the exact same bonus range. So if your fighter had a 13 strength in OSE, it has a 13 strength in Castles and Crusades. There is absolutely no change. Saving throws. They are handled differently in Castles and Crusades, but literally there is no need to do any conversion whatsoever. The saving throws that your character had in OSE, you can throw them out the window, because now in Castles and Crusades, all of those saving throws are based off of the attributes themselves. What was your death save? Well, that's going to be a Constitution save. And so if you've got a +1 to your Constitution, you get a +1 on your roll right off the bat. What do you do for a spell save? Well, that's an Intelligence save, usually. Charm is going to be Charisma. Charm in a lot of death attacks will be Charisma. I always thought the death attack was a little bit weird for Charisma, but it is explained on the character sheet. So there's really no need to do any conversion there. Armor class. In this case, it came out exactly the same. I do recommend going over the equipment tables in the Castles and Crusades Player's Handbook, because some of the items may have changed. For instance, a longbow, I believe, does 1d8 damage, and a short bow does 1d6. So there is some modifications. There's a vastly greater amount of equipment just in the Player's Handbook. And if you really want to dig in deep, there is even more equipment available to your characters in both the Adventurer's Armory and the Monstrous Armory. The Monstrous Armory, it's not all monsters. There's some stuff in there for dwarves, there's stuff in there for elves. So I recommend both those books if you want to give even more options to your players for how to spend their gold. One thing that I've noted right off the bat is that Castles and Crusades, uh, right in the player's handbook, ditched the Electrum piece. Electrum pieces still exist in Braunhaven, but I completely understand why the Electrum piece was ditched. In fact, I really question why it was brought into the game when it was. It being one Electrum piece is worth half a gold. Um, it just seemed like a little weird. And so when I put it into the Braunhaven campaign setting, I made it kind of specific to the dwarves. And pretty much everybody else outside of the Glossian Empire and Stagina hates the Electrum piece. In fact, Erebosians will charge you more. Merchants in Erebossia will actually jack up the price by 30% if they find out that you're meaning to pay with Electrum pieces. They hate that coin, and so it's you're not going to find Electrum pieces in the player's handbook. They do still exist in Braunhaven, and there is some talk amongst the different nations that describe that. Beyond that, everything's the same. Now, what if you're playing a spellcaster? Okay, well, spellcasters are going to have a little bit of change because some of the damage that is related in Castles and Crusades is going to be more in line with what we remember from 2nd edition. And so, and even 5th edition. Let's take, for example, you are a wizard and you are casting Magic Missile. So in Castles and Crusades, that's called Magi's Missile. And in Old School Essentials, Magic Missile does 1d6 plus 1 damage per level. In Castles and Crusades, which is more in line with what most of us are used to, it is 1d4 plus 1 per missile. So there's a little bit of tweaks, but if you know what the spell is, it's very simple to look it up. Like I said, there's some equipment, some weapons might do a little bit more or less. Actually, it's usually almost always more. So definitely look at spells, definitely look at equipment. Aside from that, your character is done. It is converted. You get more hit points usually, and you just look at what the spells and equipment are. In this case, you also notice that Brawlin in Castles and Crusades has a better chance to hit, and that's because fighters, in addition to having a D10 for their hit die, they also get a +1 base to hit at level 1. And so Brawlin, with his hand axe, has a +2. So +1 for his strength and a +1 for his base to hit. In addition to that, Brawlin has weapon specialization of hand axe, meaning that he gets a +1 to attacks and damage with that weapon. So, I mean, you could do weapon specialization in OSE as well. It's a little bit. It always seemed rather tacked on to me. It wasn't very well thought out. But at first level, a fighter would have 4 weapon proficiencies as a martial character, and so if he takes weapon specialization in one, that means he only has 3 weapon proficiencies beyond that. And then there would be what, a -4 to attack with a non-proficient weapon. So, which that always seemed weird to me too, because like I said, it seems tacked on and wasn't very well thought out. Why four weapon proficiencies when you look at the character class and they are proficient in all weapons? That's never explained. It's never expanded upon, and so I think this is one of the reasons why weapon specialization was such an optional rule. But there it is. So converting, you're done. Move the numbers over and adjust damages for weapons, and you're finished. That's it. How does that translate to monsters? Well, for the most part, monsters in in OSE can be used as is in Castles and Crusades. The only thing that you have to decide as the game master of either game, well, if you are Castle Keeper, looking at an OSE monster stat block, which we have here, on the left-hand side, you can see that it's very simple. OSE keeps them nice and compact, very easy and quick to grab detail. And so you have to decide, does the creature have a primary in its physical abilities or a primary in its mental abilities? So primary stats have a base challenge of 12, and plus whatever the challenge level is. So if you've got a caster that's throwing a level 3, or I guess a level 5 fireball, it would be CL5. So they would with any bonuses, they would have to get 17 or better in order to save for half. Non-primary, so secondary skills are 18 challenge base plus whatever, which makes it a lot more difficult potentially for them to save against those. Some creatures, in this case, such as the Fey Hag in Castles and Crusades, the stats are on the right. They can have primaries in both, and so that's your biggest decision. And some of that can be gleaned by looking at whatever their death save is. If their death save is super low in OSE, you can assume that they probably have physical as their primary. If their spell save is super low, like they have to roll an 8 or better in order to get up, they're probably mental. But you can go through the monsters and treasures of Castles and Crusades and kind of go through, and you can see which direction those are actually going. And so a lot of cases it's very simple. Ghosts, for instance, they're undead. They have a mental primary attribute for any saves. But not all undead are that way. I believe vampires are both. Whites, I want to say they're physical. Maybe not. But that's your biggest decision. Aside from that, they can be used fairly interchangeably. Of course, the difference between Old School Essentials and Castles and Crusades concerning Braunhaven, alignments are a little bit different. You get a little bit more nuance. So the Fey Hag originally being chaotic ends up being chaotic evil. And so, or chaos/evil. And so she puts chaos at the forefront of everything that she does, with, evil being a secondary. That could be swapped as well. She could be evil first and foremost, with spreading chaos as a secondary. The disposition system in Castles and Crusades offers a greater varied amount of alignment for your characters. Now, the beyond deciding what the saves are going to be, you're pretty much done. They can be used interchangeably. Now, of course, in Braunhaven, the Fey Hag gained a couple of abilities because it allowed me to look deeper at the creature, and I was able to really nail down exactly how I wanted the Fey Hag to be. And this is one of the top 3 reasons I switched systems, is that the format that I found in Old School Essentials, I felt limited and constrained, almost strangled by how small amount of information and how limited that information could be. And so it was very rare in OSE if you had a complete full page of stats for a monster. I think vampires are one example, almost going into 2 pages. And there's a couple of others, but the standard is very limited, as few amount of words as possible, and move on to the next one. And that, while being elegant from a page layout standpoint, it's not that great for the referee, because there is sometimes where you're looking at a creature and you have questions like, well, What environment do they usually live in? Are they able to do such and such, or X versus Y? None of that is explained. It's all completely up to you, and sometimes that can leave you lacking. And so I like that greater amount of detail in Castles and Crusades. And so in this example of the Fey Hag, we've been able to explore that character or that creature a little bit more deeply and show that she has a couple of other abilities, such as the bake pie. There was in the mystical Sylvanas Forest, the characters will run into a Fey Hag who has kidnapped a bunch of children, and she is grinding them up and turning their bones into flour to make these pies. Well, what do the pies do? That is now explained in Castles and Crusades Braunhaven Player's Guide, second edition, as opposed to the original. So that's it. You're done. That's how quick and easy it is to convert your characters over. And like I said, in the opening at the bottom, if you are for whatever reason playing fifth edition, you can go to this link at the bottom, and Troll Lord Games has already provided you with a full conversion guide for fifth edition to CNC. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.